Hey, I'm Richard Miller with Goldie May, and this is the live genealogy research series. Watch as James Tanner and I, along with invited guests, work through a genealogy problem with no script and no agenda. Maybe you'll learn from the big strategy, maybe you'll learn from the small features and the tools, or maybe you'll just see a better way to do it and you can leave a comment so we can all learn. I hope you find this really helpful. Now here is the research. Okay, welcome to episode 17. We are here with James Tanner, and today James Tanner has the case that we're going to look at. So I'll let him take it away, sharing his screen.
This for kind of a little bit different. This one is George Sisson, and he was born supposedly back in 1644. This is where I find a lot of people like bogging down and trying to find things and getting really frustrated. So George Sisson is, I can show my relationship here. He is a straight line ancestor. And I can say after 40 years of doing research, this is the first time I've even realized I had an ancestor named Sisson.
Interesting. Okay.
So, I mean, this is kind of far back. And has to go through a lot of other people before you get there. The connection here to Mary Kenyon is good. The connection to Mary Sanford looks better now that I've done some research. And actually, we connected here. This connection is very good. We have references. We have some things that I'll show that indicate that Hope Sisson was really, parents really were George and Sarah Lawton, George Sisson and Sarah Lawton. So what we're going to do is kind of give an analysis of this. First of all, you can see here that it says he was born in 1644 in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. So we need to go look at his father and see what that says. He says he was born in 1608 in Snaith, Yorkshire, England, and died in Portsmouth. So his father, Richard, was really the immigrant who came from England for a variety of purposes, lots of different things. The people who came to Rhode Island, by the way, were generally what you would call in England non-conformists. They weren't adherents to the Church of England at all, but they also did not join or weren't part of the Congregationalists or the Pilgrims or whatever you want to call those people up in Massachusetts and further northeast. So they were not welcome in Massachusetts. And this Rhode Island was an alternative because Rhode Island, from the very beginning, was the one colony that had freedom of religion. So they didn't really reject anybody. They didn't reject Quakers, Jews, anybody that was thrown out of Massachusetts ended up either in Rhode Island, sometimes in Connecticut, but usually more in Rhode Island. So
I might have heard that before in high school history class, but it doesn't really, nothing like family history to make it really stick.
Yeah. And so you can begin to see that. And so these people, like the Tanners, for instance, were Seventh-day Baptists. And they were active in that. And the Seventh-day Baptist Church, by the way, still exists, and they still have churches. And when I've driven around in the eastern part of the United States, it's always interesting. Oh, look, there's a Seventh-day Baptist Church. So there is some continuity, and these people were definitely people that had a reason for being here in America. So what are we going to do with this person? If we look here, we have 43 sources. That seems like a lot of different sources. Basically, the sources that we have are of two kinds. One is we have marriage records, and then we have birth records. And if we look at one of the birth records, we'll see where most of this information came from, and I'll pull that up. And this is a birth record out of the town records. In New England and in some other parts of the United States, some of the records were kept by the towns. And in this case, if we zoom a little bit, zoom in a lot and move that around so that you can see it, maybe a little bit smaller.
The handwriting looks so different, even going back, a couple more years than.
Well, yeah. this is really not very good handwriting. It's more printing, and and whoever did it just barely knew how to print. But you can see it says, well, maybe you can't if you can read this. George Sisson of Portsmouth, colony at Rhode Island, and Providence plantations, and saith, and Sarah Lawton, and that's really a W, not a N, daughter of Thomas Lawton, and said Portsmouth, was lawfully joined together in marriage this first day of August in the year of the Lord 1667 by William Boutson, it looks like. And so here we have a marriage, and it's not unusual. And the question that was raised immediately is, were all this stuff put in at the same time? Because here's a list of all the children. The answer is no. Apparently, whoever was writing this probably wrote these down, either copied them from an earlier record that had been made that way, but most of the records I see were added incrementally as the children were born. So this is a really good, valid birth record, and it's one of the most valuable things. Now, that's the good news about the record. The bad news about the record is, unless you just happen to have a link to it, which I did because somebody had already found it, the only way to find this record is to go through the town records of New England page by page and read every single page all the way through from the top to the bottom and see if you can find mention of the people that you're looking for. And you may want to go back because here's Isaac Lawton, son of Thomas Lawton. And if you notice that the wife there was named Lawton, so I have another ancestor. So basically, these are records where when you find one person, you go back and look for everybody. And what I've learned to do on these records, if I'm getting into the town record, is I'll go back and review it maybe 2-3 times or more. And it seems like every time I go through, I said, well, how did I miss that? And how did I miss that? It's like, well, one thing you kind of learn is that after you look at a lot of records, it's a good idea to get up, run around the room, jump up and down, yell a few times, and then go back and look at the records again, because you just get tired and your eyes just refuse to see what's there. And so you just get, so you really have to kind of learn how to exercise this kind of thing, and we get to be better at it as you learn to read. Plus, the handwriting over the years becomes more and more readable until all of a sudden you can't figure out why you had any trouble reading it in the first place, because it was just as plain as whatever. So that's kind of the way this started. Now, when we get back to George, now the question here, of course, is why am I starting with George Sisson? And I'll go to details here, because the intention here is not to go back any further. Richard Sisson is very likely, all this information on Richard may or may not be correct. And I started to do some initial research here and found that there are a lot of different opinions about Richard, which is normal kind of thing. And the first one that I came to said, nobody knows where he was born. And yet somebody has a birth record for him and his parents, and so we're thinking, well, okay, do I really want to fight that battle today? And yeah, that's possible. But I find that the people who are doing that either have to be extremely persistent and learn a lot about the country and the records and the history and everything else to make good decisions about who the parents are, or they just have to find the name someplace in England and stick it on there and be happy. But that doesn't work. And usually we end up cutting those people off from those particular names. In other words, detaching them. They don't disappear, but I mean, they float off into the edges of
other parts of the tree.
Yeah. Okay. So now one of the things we want to do is we want to view this person's tree. When we view this person's tree, we see that he's here in the right here in the middle of the tree. So it puts him in the middle of the tree. And now we can change. This is a little bit different interface than we've had previously. We can go up here and look at landscape view. We have some other views, but we have a descendancy view. So right there, we can see all the children. And we have one that died died without any marriage. The question is there a marriage on this? And when you look at the little purple thing, it said person may have had children. That's because she was old enough to have gotten married and to have had children, even if she did die in 98, because that would make her 28 years old. And so it's very likely that she was married. So there's one right there to do research on. The rest of these all show spouses, because that's what this arrow means down here. And so we can then go here and choose how many generations. This is all moved around, by the way, lately. So 2 generations really doesn't change anything, which is interesting. But 3 generations does, and that opens it up to the children or the grandchildren of George Sisson. Now, when we get into this, you can see my interest in this particular family, because there are 3 things that we look for. Do we have a death date that shows when they died? If there's no death date, there's a distinct possibility that the person lived long enough to have children, get married and have children. So that may be a whole new family line with descendants coming clear up to the present. And obviously we're adding many thousands of people if possible, if you want to keep working on it. That's every one of those that doesn't have a spouse. So every one of these individuals here that are just have a dot and no arrow means we don't know who they married. At least it's not recorded in the record here in FamilySearch. And so when we look at it, that person was not married. It's at about 1697, which means they have 2 sources, which means hardly any work has been done on that person. Same here, 0 sources, about 1700. Some of these may not actually be children of this family. But if we get into the research and find that they are, it's very, very likely, being from Rhode Island, as I just showed with the birth records in the town records, that the only problem is that someone has gone through the town records page by page and found this particular record. And when you get up to about 1700, then you start to get additional records, and we'll talk just a little bit about that. But if you look down, you'll see that that's the case almost all the way down. Somebody's filled in a bunch of names, has done little or no research, added very few sources. And so going back and doing this person, if you think that your goal is to, well, I'm going to find out who George's parents were, well, you're in the 1700s, or 1600s, and you might as well figure that you're going to spend the rest of your life doing that. Or you can say, oh, I'm going to find all of George's descendants, and you'll find out all these people. Whedon, if I met a Whedon, I wouldn't have any clue that I had an ancestor in common or a relative in common. So, this is like, I've never heard of these people. And so this is kind of like, oh, wow, I found a whole new area to go into that's just really great. Okay, so
you
now
call this descendancy research or collateral research?
Yeah, this is descendancy. Yeah. So you have descendancy up here. By the way, sometimes the dictionaries don't recognize that word. I don't know why, but if you try doing descendants, they go, what's a descendant? Anyway, if you want kind of the technical genealogical thing, these people are all cousins. So, 6th cousin, 2 generations removed, something like that. So it'll start to look really vague, but they're validly cousins. I just showed that this is a direct line ancestor. So,
and I guess it's possible that there's Whedons out there that are doing their research back and haven't found that they're connected to this family either. So they'll be, they may be working their way up while you are working your way down.
Yeah, and it's not unusual that I will start to connect into people that have research done and are already in the family tree and things like that. So it just becomes, but it's a very, let's say, satisfying and valuable way to try to find more. Now, if you find out that every single one of the people has been found in marriage and all of them have 50 sources, then somebody's already done what I'm going to start to do here with this family. So now the question is, okay, so where do I start? What do I want to do? My first question is always is what is already there? So if I go back, and I'm going to go back to George here because I'm going to open him up in another tab. And if I look at the sources, although there's a large number or a relatively large number of sources, as I started to say, they're all birth and marriage records. What's missing here? Probate records, for one, and you will find the probate records in the town records in a lot of the New England towns.
That's nice.
So as long as you're looking through the book, you may just run across everything. The land sales, the taxing, everything was into what they did in the town records. And so that's where you're going to find all this information. Well, here's the will and testament of George. So that helps. And if we get down here and look at that, and I'll open that in Ancestry. So I'm going to pull that over to this other side. So here's his will. And if you get into it, you'll see maybe it is. There's Richard. That's Richard. Okay, so basically that's his father, or supposedly his father. So we need to read through this will and see who this is. It may be that he's just mentioned here in the will, and this isn't his father, but here's a transcription. This is what you can find by doing more and more research, of course, that you would look for the same kind of document for George and for all of the male and female people. There's kind of this underground idea that the females back in the old days didn't have property and their husband owned all the property, so they never had anything, and you wouldn't bother to look for them in probate because they never owned property. Well, that's too bad. That's wrong. The women all inherited the property. The women all owned it, and they all had wills. And so you're going to go through here and find all the women's wills, and that helps you get even more information about the family. So it's important to do that. But here's the next step, the one that I, basically like to do at each time. I'm doing this more and more as time goes on because the number of resources have grown to just astronomical rates. So what I did was I went to the other big website that helps people, and that is archive.org. This really should be considered to be one of the big genealogy websites now. And the reason why is this little thing right here. If you click here, there are 35 million books in this library.
Incredible.
Okay, so what's the simplest thing to do? Well, one of the things I could do is just put in SISSON and look in the text, and they will just search all 35 million books and tell me if there's any books on Sissons. And that will just crank away for the next 2 days. No. Okay, so there are 163,074. We may want to cut that down a bit. So how about calling him George?
I do see descendants of Richard and Mary Sisson on the second row.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a jackpot because I don't have to go through 163,000 books. But basically, this is the book that I found. Okay. So here's a book, and it'll just be a second here. But it's going to tell me, I just put in George, so it's going to tell me every place in this book where there's a George Sisson. And the problem is it's on every single page. So that doesn't work. Okay. So
I see, by the way, that you're logged into archive.org. So you've got an account there, which gives you quote unquote lending privileges there, right?
Right. Now, this particular book, it says borrow for one hour. Okay. And so that means that they really aren't sure about the copyright. And the reason is, if we go down here, the book was published in 1999. So there's some question about whether it's been copyrighted or not. But the advantage here is that I can click here and borrow the book immediately. And in a couple of seconds, it'll come out.
I don't think I have an archive.org account, so I need to do that. I think whenever
Okay.
I've used it, I've been looking at just
So
the
it tells
free
me in an
books.
hour this will be returned. So now I can
Uh,
go, now I can sit here and go through the book page by page. I can read it. Of course, we have this Sisson's in here, and we don't really want that. So okay, so you can go here, you're ready to read it, and you're ready to search it. And there's the thing. And in this particular book, turns out to be a gem because these people spent like their whole lives putting together all this information, even before
wow.
there were computers. And they have noted every record and everything that every time they found a record, they've got it in here. So they've got
Incredible.
a notation to where their records are. So here you have a fairly reliable, I would call it, more than fairly reliable, quite reliable record backed up by sources.
Hmm.
And it's relatively recent. So it means that it's possible that they used, at some point in time, they might have even had some computer searches and things like that. And so that can be used as kind of a map. Now, I wouldn't start just copying this information into the family tree, but I would go through and see if each of the people have some kind of source. And this is my direct line ancestor right here, Hope Sisson.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so and they have her husband, and then they have all sorts of information and all the things, the marriage dates and all those things that you can use to find additional records.
So their sources might give you ideas for additional sources for you to look at.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so now here it is. So every hour I have to return this book. And the question is, or at least borrow it again after an hour. And so what if I want this book? I mean, like sometimes you can download the thing. So where else would I go to find this book? Well, what I did was I went out and looked for it. And the first place I would go look for this is, I'm going to copy the part of the name anyway, or the name of the book, is to go to WorldCat, because WorldCat's the catalog of all of the libraries around the whole world, like 2 billion catalog entries here.
Incredible.
So then you just put that in and search everything. There's the book right there. Well, there's actually 2 copies. Both of them indicates there's an ebook and all the formats and everything. If I click on this one, it shows you that there's a copy in the Family History Library, a lot of other libraries. Doesn't have to be one at the BYU Family History Library, but there is one here. But here's the another key. This one is also in the HathiTrust. This is another huge collection of digitized material, millions of digitized books. And they are the ones that are under copyright are just simply not available. You can look at them. It's kind of like Google Books. You can only see like a preview of it. But with the ones that are not under copyright, you can look at the whole book. So I'm going to look and see if it turns up that this is in the HathiTrust. No.
Okay.
They say, well, it's a catalog record and there's a text view only. And so let's see what that does for my life. Nothing. Okay, so that didn't help me. But here it says you can try to find this item in a library. So they'll search to see if another library has it. And but we're back. We've come back.
They put you back on
WorldCat. Now I think, well, okay, so we look at the Family History Library and see it. And there it is. And we can view a digital copy of it. And this one doesn't need to be checked out.
Earlier edition or something?
No, somebody had permission to put this online. So FamilySearch had permission to put this particular thing online. And here it is, the whole book.
Interesting.
Okay. But there's another more interesting thing, and that is up here in the corner, you can see this print or download the files. And I can go click, which I did just a moment ago, well, a while ago, and downloaded a whole copy of this book.
And then it can be even, much faster to browse it and search it on your
Oh yeah,
computer.
then I have it on my computer anytime I want to open it. I can have it open over on one of my monitors and work with it back and forth, and it wouldn't run out every hour, and I wouldn't have to go back and recheck it out every hour. And then
Yeah.
there's always the possibility that someone else checks it out and then I can't get to it. And so it's just a thing. But that process, okay, so kind of to review that process, what I'm saying is that this people back at this time period are, and especially in parts, it doesn't really matter, because you could say, yeah, it's in New England, but it's only in New England because in 1600s there were hardly anybody else anyplace else. So it's it's going to be a lot fewer people back then. But it could happen in England. It happens in Germany and all over Europe, and in many other places, that people have written books about their families. And in this case, this is 10 generations from 1608. That's down Descendants. And this book has 193 pages of people.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
working through this book and working with what's not in FamilySearch should help me add a lot of information to all these people that are
Very
in
cool.
here. And this is just one source. And as I go along, I may very well find many, many other sources. Now, the other part of this, and this is the third part that I wanted to point out, was that you can also go working in Ancestry, which many, many people do, by the way. They will work at the same time on FamilySearch and also work on Ancestry. So here's George. I've already looked him up, so that's kind of, didn't want to spend time doing a lot of whatever. So I've looked him up here in Ancestry. I've added in sources that I had from FamilySearch, and I've added in some other sources. So, I mean, it's not like I just started on this, just a few minutes ago. I've been working on it for a week or two. And so I also have the children in here, but I have almost nothing on the children. So when you click here, see, I don't have anything yet.
All right.
Now, one advantage is that you're going to get, if you have an Ancestry subscription, you're going to get record hints here, and you're going to get record hints over on your FamilySearch group. So when you go back here, if there are any record hints, they'll show up. But here they'll also show up.
So it's nice to have both of them, so you can just have the computers working for you.
Yeah. And then you can evaluate those record hints. And as you move forward in time, you're going to find more record hints. In fact, if we go back to George here on Ancestry and drop down to somebody later, like Hope, I've already added in more sources. And then if you go even down more recently, coming more towards the present, then let's say we get down to John. See, there are 14 record hints that pop up for him. Oh, and this is normal, because he was born in 1688, so he comes into this later part of, doesn't die until 1784, which is, of course, after it's already the United States of America. And whether this is the right person and they have the right, whether the record hints are correct, is what we'd have to do, is just go in here and look at all the record hints and see if they are really accurate. Now, so that's kind of the process. And cool. Even though this is happening in Rhode Island, and even though you would think that, oh, well, that's Rhode Island, but this isn't unusual to have the same kind of thing happening. And the key here is, if you keep working, eventually you get up to 1850 in the United States, or 1841 in England, or wherever you happen to be doing this kind of thing. And then you're into census records. And by 1850, you're into, in England, you're into civil registration records, and you begin to get entire families, and you get a lot of records more quickly. So back here, it's kind of slogging through a lot of different kinds of things and looking at a lot of different records to get the whole picture. And then once you get moving down, down, it gets easier and easier because you're closer and closer to the present.
Very cool.
If that's an incentive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So that's kind of the way. And so you've caught me, and this one you've caught me in the middle of going through each of the children and adding in all this stuff. And as I do that, then I will continue to compare what's on FamilySearch and make sure that I get the records over to FamilySearch. Now, how do you get the records to FamilySearch? Well, there's a program. It's a browser app for Chrome, and it's called RecordSeek. And if you use RecordSeek, you can go to a record, and I'll just give an example of that. Let's say I've got this Rhode Island military census record here, and I say, yes, it matches my person in the tree. I'm going to have to look at it. But when I go up here to RecordSeek, then I can say I want it over on FamilySearch, and then I have to find the ID number of that person. And it's John. And I can copy that ID number. And then when I come here, then I can put that ID number in here. And then I'm not going to do this because I haven't actually looked at it to make sure it's correct, but then it'll create and attach this source directly to that person on FamilySearch. And then I can also attach it by the same process. It'll say, do you want to attach it to somebody else and somebody else? And you can keep adding it to all the people that happen to show up in that source. And it does that kind of free and automatically to get the information over into FamilySearch.
Very cool. Good tip.
Okay.
All right. Is that time for our stand break that you talked about?
Stand up and run around. Only if you're reading old town records. It doesn't matter. You can sit here and do this for a long time.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, James.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.